On behalf of Cambridge, welcome everyone to our webinar this afternoon, introducing resources to meet the cross-curriculum priority for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures in the maths classroom. My name is Kim Keane and I'm the State Manager for Queensland. Welcome to all states this afternoon as we journey into these resource additions relevant to everyone here today. But before we get started this afternoon, in the spirit of reconciliation, Cambridge University Press and Assessment acknowledges the traditional custodians of land on which we gather today. We pay respects to elders past and present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. So Cambridge is very proud to announce our collaboration with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Mathematics Alliance to create a set of 12 mathematical investigations. It's available for users of the latest editions of the 7 to 10 maths resources that address the cross-curriculum priority for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures. Teachers using our Essential Maths for the Australian Curriculum Fourth Edition, Essential Maths for the Victorian Curriculum Third Edition, and CambridgeMATHS New South Wales 7 to 10 Third Edition will be able to access these resources in their online teaching suites in the coming days. The investigations are accompanied by teacher notes, assessment rubrics, and guidance on steps that teachers can take to adapt the investigations to the context of the country upon which they're teaching from. ATSIMA CEO Professor Chris Matthews, who worked closely with Cambridge to create these investigations, is joining us this afternoon to explain some theoretical frameworks that are important for understanding these new resources. He'll also describe the ideas that underpin the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures cross-curriculum priority as it relates to mathematics. So Chris will then be joined by Cambridge's mathematics publishing manager, Scott Halligan, and author Justin Robinson to get into the details of the context of the new resources and show some examples. So let me introduce in a little more detail our speakers this evening, and then I'll hand over to Chris. So Professor Chris Matthews is from the Quandamooka people in Minjerribah, which is Stradbroke Island in Queensland. Chris received a PhD in Applied Mathematics from Griffith University and was a senior lecturer in Applied Mathematics at Griffith School of Environment. Over the last 10 years, Chris developed a deeper interest in mathematics education for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander learners and exploring the connections between mathematics and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledge. Following Chris's presentation, we'll hear from Justin Robinson, who you've heard from before. He'll be sharing with us his experience as one of the authors and the knowledge he gained from working on this project. Justin is co-founder of the Wellbeing Distillery, an organisation committed to energising, equipping and empowering teachers. He consults with schools globally on the fields of student and educator wellbeing. Prior to this, Justin spent 25 years teaching maths, covering all levels of secondary education, including teaching VCE, the IB, and A-levels. His driving passion was engaging and challenging students with a safe learning environment. And Justin is an honorary fellow of the University of Melbourne's Graduate School of Education. So without further ado, please welcome our first speaker, Professor Chris Matthews. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I might just go for the next slide, is that all right? But I'll just sort of say that we're pretty excited at ATSIMA when Cambridge Press sort of approached us to do these publications. There's always an interesting translation piece for what you do in practice and actually what you write in a textbook. So from that process, I have learned a lot from the team, and really pleased to have that experience of actually creating these with the team. I think we'll talk more about that as well. But as part of my team that we had through ATSIMA, I also enrolled the help of Fiona Langdon. She is an excellent teacher, educator for many years. She's also one of the founders of the Guinea Freedom School, which is a language immersion school in Coffs Harbour for the Gumbaynggirr people. Sorry, the name of the school is actually Gumbaynggirr Freedom School, not Guinea. Gumbaynggirr Freedom School down in Coffs Harbour. So she has a lot of experience in looking at the idea of culture, because she's Gumbaynggirr, so her own culture, in connection to education. And she, being more of a teacher than me, because I actually wasn't trained as a teacher. As you heard, I was a maths geek for many years. she brought the nice aspect to create the rubrics and teacher notes, particularly around cultural responsive pedagogies. I'd just like to show this picture because this is my country here. This is Quandamooka country. It's I'm actually over on the mainland here in Cleveland, or Namdibi in the language that I forget. You can't see my pointer, and I was doing that. I knew I shouldn't be doing, but over in the mainland is Namdibi where I am, behind the silos. Um, and This part of Minjerribah, Strait Gold, is in our language called Gumpi, and that's near the school. And the reason I show this picture too is that just to emphasize that I did start my career in and I've lost the picture, gone the wrong way. Just to emphasize that I did start a career as a mathematician, so that's my expertise is a mathematician. But I was sort of one of the first Aboriginal people to enter into the maths world. And I found myself needing to work more with that with my people. So I shifted from mathematics to maths education. And one of the first maths education projects I did was actually in my own community. I ran with the rationale in my mind is if I'm going to inflict any ideas of mine on somebody, I better start with my own community. So that's what I did. And I created a model called the Gumpi model, and it's connected to this country here. But in creating that model, I really had to start to think about what is a connection between maths and culture. And on the next slide, we'll see there's a pictorial here of this iceberg model, which I often use in my professional learning with teachers. Obviously, I don't just present that model, we work through it. But just getting people's idea of what culture is, and I just get them to do one word response. And I create this sort of image of an iceberg over that period of time. So the idea is that the wavy line is the water, the stuff underneath it is the intangible part of culture, the stuff you can't see. But the other stuff above it is the things that you can see as evidence of that culture. So it's the cultural expression space. So the arrows represent the fact that the stuff that sits underneath always will inform how we express our culture. So our history, our spirituality, our beliefs, the way we see the world will always reflect how we do art, what language we speak, what music we listen to, what music we perform, what stories we tell, even what food we eat and so forth, or even how we eat our food. So there's a whole range of stuff that informs these cultural expressions. Now, the downward arrow really is an acknowledgement that as we do this as on individual and community scales, and even national scales, we want to keep on going. We will do things that will give people an understanding of who we are, and to me, that's a learning experience amongst people. So when you are with people and you see their cultural expressions, you also have an opportunity to reevaluate how you feel about your history, your identity, and so forth. One example I often give is the January 26th, which comes around every single year, and we have the exact same conversation. I'm not going to get into that conversation, but it's also an opportunity where you can actually try and listen and understand how people are reacting to that day, what culture, what practices they do, what ceremonies they do, and then you may choose to change your practice or not. That's up to you. But I'm not. It's just an example of how these things operate. But if I just want to hone down on history, because when cross-cultural curriculum stuff was happening within the curriculum, so when we were putting First Nations perspective in the curriculum, there was a lot of hesitation and fear that sat around that. And I think that really is an expression of the history that we come from. So again, history is in that bottom part of our iceberg that informs our practice. And what I'm saying here is that the way we have our education system, the way we teach mathematics even, is informed by our history. So if we look at the history between First Nations people and non-Indigenous people in this country, and if we head to the next slide, please, we'll see that our relationship started on this basis, terra nullius, which means land belonging to nobody. So What I'm trying to emphasize here, this is our shared history, but also the beginning of our relationship with each other. And it's not a very good start, because you got First Nations people or Indigenous people in the blue circle where we were considered the most primitive race on the planet. They had no relevance in this modern society, so we're totally devalued. And we can talk about other things like attempted genocide, dispossession, and all that sort of stuff, which is still important to discuss and understand. But my main point here is that Indigenous people never really had a place within what we call an Australian society. If we go to the other side, non-Indigenous people are the knowledge holders, their culture is valued, they were considered the advanced race, even to the point where Indigenous people were considered to die out. They thought that, Darwinian idea that eventually Indigenous people will just die out, so we will be replaced by the more advanced race. All these ideologies were playing out as Australia was being developed, through our education and so forth. Now, what I want to draw your attention to is that I also put near the non-Indigenous bubble, no opportunity. And this is the stuff that we don't often talk about. So no opportunity really means that if you grew up in a society that does not value or does not seek to really understand First Nations people, then you're going to grow up in a society where you have no opportunity to build that understanding, in your whole entire life. And I hear that a lot from people. I never knew this before. Why weren't I taught this at school? This sort of stuff. And that no opportunity really creates a void, what I like to call a void in the psyche of Australia. But that void tends to get filled with stereotypes. So it's more about non-Indigenous perceptions of who Indigenous people are. And then what also manifests in that void is the fact that because there's no relationship or no positive relationship, we have a lot of fear when we're entering into stuff like Indigenous perspectives, like anything to do with Indigenous people. And with this fear, always carries a sense of mistrust. And if you want to see a actual statistical report on this, Reconciliation Australia was doing, I think they're still doing, the Reconciliation Barometer. And they used to do a statistical sample of Australia, including Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And they asked the question, is there any trust in this relationship? And it was about 80% believed that there was no trust in the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So there is a lot of stuff that we need to address. And I think education is a place where we need to start addressing this. And if we as educators don't feel the fear and do it anyway, then we're going to keep on going around in circles, just like January 26th. We're going to keep on going around in circles until we actually start to address this fear, mistrust, and build a better understanding of who Indigenous people are. I just always like to acknowledge there is always goodwill in this space. Notice also there's two arrows. The red arrow is supposed to represent in that when people don't really understand Indigenous people, there's usually a lot of things imposed on Indigenous people. And the blue arrow is like a pushback from Indigenous people, which they usually are saying, stop imposing stuff on us and just listen and talk to us and we can work things out together. So I will acknowledge there's always goodwill in that space, but also just remember that you always got to remember and check whether your goodwill's an imposition on Indigenous people or you're actually working with Indigenous people. So that's the thing that you've got to keep in the back of your mind. But when it comes to these not elaborations, activities with the Cambridge Press book, we specifically wanted to look at activities that have a lot of backed up evidence within the current literature. So there's not necessarily a requirement for you to engage Indigenous people through these activities. But what it is, and I'm hoping what it is to break down that no opportunity, or that point where we can actually start to learn about Indigenous people and start to have the minds of inquiry around that. And then hopefully from engaging with these activities, we can then start to think about, well, who is my local Aboriginal people? How can I start to build a relationship with them and things like this? So there's things that will come out of these activities. So the activities really are designed as its first step, and I call it like a reconciliation process. So it's the first step reconciliation process where you are coming to know about Indigenous people through these activities. Can I go to the next slide, please? I just wanted to quickly show you what the Gumpi model is. I didn't really engage too much with the Gumpi model in terms of, I sort of did in a way with these activities. But really what this model is about is positioning maths as a cultural expression. So just like the iceberg, all knowledge is informed by who we are and the culture of the people that have created it. And one of the beautiful things about mathematics is that's actually been created by many cultures around the world, to the point where I don't think we really realize it. I think the maths we get through our classroom has been the English version of it. So it doesn't necessarily acknowledge the rich history that a lot of maths comes from. So maths is one of those inherent things that all people did. But the thing is that it is expressed in different ways. It's not necessarily going to be X, Y's, and Z's and alphas and betas, but it's going to be expressed in certain ways where it may not look like maths, but there is a lot of mathematical understanding and thinking that sits behind it. Yeah. And I just want to acknowledge that, and to acknowledge that there is cultural bias in mathematics. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing, because we're all people, we all come from different cultures, need to celebrate the diversity within the thinking. And this model will help think through that. But I'm not doing a PL on that model, but I just wanted you to know that it exists. So go on the next slide. Now, I was involved in doing the ACARA elaborations through which did take a lot of time. It was my first experience in working with an organisation at that level. That's right at the doorstep of the ministers, and I just want to emphasise that all of the activities that we're doing come from elaborations that were written for the cross-curriculum priority. Yeah, so it is connected to a specific maths content, and there's an elaboration under it. There always seems to be a bit of confusion when it comes to the First Nations elaborations, because people seem to freak out and say that we must do this. Elaborations are actually in the optional space. It's in a suggestion about how to teach some content. So I just wanted to reinforce that point, because people think that you got to do it this way. It's not that at all. If we want to see you properly engage with these activities, wanting you to see some value in it. If you don't feel comfortable or don't see value in it, then just don't do it. It's not a requirement. But we're hoping that you will see the value in what we're doing, and it will engage with these activities. And just know that the framework for the elaborations was already set by the Indigenous Advisory Group, and it had these four or five main things. That it is about living communities. So there's a lot of stuff we talk about is about a continuing culture. It's not about things in the past. Country and place is central to Aboriginal way of thinking. That all knowledge comes from country, from an Aboriginal point of view. So we always must consider country when we're actually thinking about doing stuff within this space. And that informs the culture of our people and our identity. And I think what we're doing, and as I said, is a reconciliation piece for many students within your classroom. But if you have Aboriginal kids in your classroom, it's hopefully going to support their identity as an Aboriginal person as well. And that's one thing you must also keep in the back of your mind when you're teaching this thing, making sure that this is about supporting them and making them feel, supporting the identity of the student is what I'm really trying to say. Not doing the opposite, which can happen. You feel targeted or singled out. So you got to move away from that targeting, singled out, and hopefully a student will see that we're valuing Indigenous people. So the more you value our culture and value our people and talk about stories around our people, where a lot of these elaborations come from, I think having that narrative is an inclusive sort of narrative where people will feel culturally safe within it. But part of that will be written into the teacher notes as well to help you with that cultural safety aspect. So we go to the next slide. You just want to just show you that there's a whole range of stuff that sits around elaborations. And we have covered off on some of these, nowhere near nowhere near all of them, but so some of these we're doing the 12. So we did 3 for each year. And I'll just want to show you the diversity of it. And please get on there and have a look and see what you think about them. Just explore them, and see how you feel about some of the things that we have written. Now we'll say here that elaborations are only 1 sentence, so there's not much you can put in 1 sentence, and sometimes it can be a bit daunting to read 1 sentence and know what to do with it. So hopefully also engaging with these activities with the ones we've done, you can see how we've expanded from that one sentence and outwards. Okay, next. I don't want to talk too much about this anymore. How much have I gone for time? Am I running out of time?
Chris, you're doing pretty good in time. We got 5 or 10 minutes, and then we can get into some of the details. So there is time if you'd like to get into this.
Yeah. Look, I just wanted to value this because I've already talked about the fact that mathematics is a cultural expression. Gurutu is the kingship system of the Arnhem Land people, of the Yolngu people in Arnhem Land. And it's really about looking at the complexity of it, but also understanding the philosophies that sit behind it. So kingship is a poor English translation for Gurutu, because kingship implies connection with people, where Gurutu is about connections to all the elements of the world. So everything you think about in the world, from water, wind, plants, animals, stars, moon, whatever you're thinking about, it's part of the system. So for this, the first level of this system is a thing called moiety, and moiety is an anthropological word. It's Latin for meaning 2 halves. And up there it's called Yirija and Dua. So everything in the whole entire world is put into Yirija, and everything is put into Dua. Now, underneath Yirija and Dua, and this next step below here is for people only, you have what they call 4 mulk underneath each moiety. So Yirija have 4 mulk and Dua have 4 mulk. So you notice that there's an F and an M against the name, so that's just a female-male version of that mulk. Mulk is in English translation is skin name. Might have heard of skin name, but mulk is the language word for that. So you got 4 underneath all of those. Now, if you go to the next slide, this is how, when you're born into Aboriginal society, this is how you get your mulk, because you actually get it from your mother. So if you look at the circle on the very top, you've got Gutjung, and that was underneath the Yirija moiety. That's why it's got a Y above it. So if your mother was Gutjung, then all her children will be in the next one, Balanjung, with the circle with the arrow pointing to it. Now remember, there was a male version of that name, so the male version should really sit there. I'm only using the female names. And the reason I'm doing this is because this is about a mother-child relationship. And that's actually what Yothi Indi means, a mother-child relationship. So from the mother, you move where the arrow is to their children. So all the women in Balanjung would give birth to the next one along with Bernardijung, and all the women in Bernardijung would move along with being Kalyan. Yeah. So when you marry, you actually marry across the circle. So go to the next slide. Click. These are the connections when you marry. So when you're in Gutjung, you'd have to marry someone in Wamatjung on the other circle. So it works like that. So if my mother was Gutjung, then my father would be in the Wamat group, which is in the other circle. So then my father's mother would be Belanjung, which is at the bottom of the bottom circle, and so forth. So you got to think through these 2 interconnected circles. And this is only the very first kindergarten level of kingship. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is that mathematically, this can be described as an abelian group in group theory. So it is an algebraic group. So there's a lot of algebraic properties within this system, even though when you look at it, you might not think there's maths involved in it, besides maybe networks or something you might be thinking about in your mind. But this, to me, is quite significant because it actually goes to the complexity of thinking in Aboriginal society. When you go to the next level of kingship system, you got like 4 interconnected circles that are also on a cycle which are all interconnected. So it gets even more complex. And this complexity comes from the fact that you are mapping people to country, to particular spots on country. And when you do that through an Aboriginal education system, your responsibility is to understand how you sit within the network of all entire world. So you can think about the whole world as a network of interconnected relationships, not just with people, with everything. And you got to understand how you're positioned within that network, and you have responsibilities to strengthen that network, to make it strong and to keep it maintained. And this is one of the reasons that we're the oldest living culture in Australia. So really what I'm saying to you, when you're actually looking at these activities, I want you to keep in the back of your mind that Aboriginal people's thinking is about all the relationships that sit within the world. Yeah. I want you to sort of keep that in the back of your mind. And that knowledge comes from country in that sense as well. Can we go to the next slide? Next one. I don't know why that one's sitting there. So when we got stuff through the years here, we have something, for example, deadly houses, which I'll talk a bit about later, but there's activities about water. Now, water is, this is an activity more about evaporation, but just to give you an indication of water, water is central to Aboriginal stories because it's such a life thing. You know, even if you think about the story of the Rainbow Serpent, I know people might identify most of the rainbow, but it's about water creating country, effectively. You know, because that's why it's a rainbow. You know, it's connected to water. So water is throughout Aboriginal stories and understandings, and from the stories that I've seen and experienced, they talk about how water moves through country, how it takes on the elements of country. They know it when it goes underground, they know when it re-emerges, they know the full connection across country. And that can happen because of how they've mapped their societies across all parts of country, and through that they develop understandings of that. We do have a lot of stuff around gaming, which I think is important anyway, because it's about kids playing. But again, know that when you're talking about kids' games, those games are usually constructed within a cultural perspective, within a particular culture, because they want to teach certain skills. Yeah. So you can think about the skills that are being taught through that game, as well as where I've applied them to statistics. And I think in the WIMI game in year 10, we've actually applied one to teaching simultaneous equations as well. I think fire was a really important one. So we got ones around, a couple about fire, because fire management is a big thing in Australia. Aboriginal people have managed this country with fire, so it gives kids an understanding of how that is. And when you think about managing fire, you just don't think about that one bit of land that you're standing on. You think about the season, what's the best season, what's happening with all the other animals and plants. When is the right time to fire? It's not a particular calendar date. All these environmental indicators need to be aligned to actually do that. I think beyond that, we have some other ones like koala counting and carbon dating, where we're looking at connections between scientists and Indigenous communities, and where they're actually working together to discover things, to look at certain things, to manage koalas, for example, and those sorts of things. So I'm hoping I'm giving you a bit of a hint here, but if you just, I've got one more slide, I think. And I just really want to emphasize again that on a superficial level, you might think this is basic primitive architecture. And again, what I'm trying to emphasize here is that these are designed for the country that they're sitting on through an Aboriginal worldview. That is one of the fundamentally important things. It's done with readily available resources. It's done without, you know, big masses of mining and stuff, because that's not part of Aboriginal culture in a sense, not big mining anyway. But also part of our culture is to move with the seasons. So it's not, we built semi-permanent, probably about the best that you can say. So because down in Melbourne, they had sort of bricks and stuff where they did semi-permanent housing and things. But in the end, what I'm trying to say here is that architecture is culturally defined. And as you learn more about Aboriginal culture, you get a reasoning behind why these sort of houses existed, as one example. I think I am done. What's the next slide? Oh no, I'm not done. How are we going for time, Scott?
We're going good, Chris. I think this naturally would transition into some of the other things that we'll talk about next. So this is coming at a good time, this one.
Cool. So anyway, I just really want to emphasize that we do have rubrics. We have the usual mathsy type stuff in there that you'll be happy about in the rubrics, but we did make an effort to start people to think about cultural perspectives in the activities that you're doing, and also about being culturally responsive. So we did introduce this type of rubric. And one of the main reasons too is to hopefully encourage teachers not to do a superficial pass over this connection, that it is actually it's really strongly part of the education of the students in connection to the maths that we are teaching. And again, this is also emphasized within the teacher notes, and we used ATSIMA's culturally responsive framework as part of that, as well as ACARA. So these are stuff that are coming out of organisations, just not out of my head. So these are the things that they are suggesting that we build these culturally responsive classrooms around. And I think the strength of these things, I just want to emphasise again, the strength of these is to take that step to start understanding Indigenous people in a much bigger way, to understand the culture and the value of their culture, and why it's still important today.
Chris, thank you very much for all of that. I did have a bunch of questions that I had ready to go, but then you pretty much answered all of them during your presentation anyway. So we'll move on to Justin Robinson next, and Justin and you, Chris, can be in conversation with each other about that, because that's how these investigations and activities came about. Just a few quick things before we introduce Justin. For those of you who are in Victoria or New South Wales, you're hearing aspects of the ACARA version of these elaborations and content descriptors. For those of you in Victoria, the elaborations in the Victorian Curriculum 2.0 are almost identical to the ACARA elaborations. There are small language differences, but by and large they are identical. So there is a very straightforward mapping in terms of the suitability when teaching the Victorian curriculum. But generally speaking, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Histories and Cultures cross-curriculum priority is a fundamental part of the Victorian curriculum, and it also is a fundamental part of the New South Wales syllabus as well. In terms of New South Wales, this content is present in the content examples, and we will provide some guidance about how those map to what we've done here as well. So you'll find a lot of use for these in New South Wales, and there's a lot of New South Wales context as well in terms of country throughout the set of 12 that we've provided. One other quick thing is, if you do have any questions for Chris or Justin, who you'll hear from next, or anything you'd like to ask about these or what you've heard so far, there is a Q&A that will be coming up towards the end in about 10-12 minutes. So you're welcome to put questions anytime from now on, and we'll get to those in a minute. Okay, Justin Robinson, as you heard at the start in Kim's introduction, has been a Cambridge author for a very long time. And he was one of the people that I turned to help out on this. So without further ado, I'll pass on to Justin, and he'll talk about his experience of working on these as an author and working with Chris, Fiona as well. Over to you, Justin.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Chris and Kim, and lovely to see everyone, although not really see you, but lovely to be with you. So many of the words that I've heard Chris say before, and just still hearing them again, are so relevant to me. The idea of this being an opportunity the idea of feel the fear and do it anyway, not take a superficial pass. They're all things that have now deep within me, having heard Chris say them to me personally a few times. For me, understanding and empowering First Nations people has been something important to me for many years. Not with a whole lot of personal experience. Yes, a head of a boarding house with Indigenous people. Yes, colleagues working in Northern Territory and going to visit them in schools there, in remote communities. So little experiences, but still something incredibly important to me. And I very much, when Scott reached out to me, I wanted this project to be real for me. And then, of course, the hope was it would be real for teachers and students. And to date, it has completely over-delivered for me. It does feel very significant and real. And I genuinely encourage you to feel the fear, to do it anyway, to embrace these investigations and engage with them with your students, because I think it will help our nation. And that sounds too big for a few little maths investigations, but it's genuinely how I feel, because it, not 100%, but it's changed me in small ways. And I think important ways. And I think that's why Chris is passionate about this work that he does. And he's helped me. One little example, Chris was just talking briefly about Garutu and kinship in terms of the relationship Indigenous people have with the elements of nature. And one of the very early investigations I had a first go of was regarding water. And the one that I said, a precious resource, skillful management. The one Chris was alluding to, a little bit more about water evaporation and a bit of a volume and a measurement one, and understanding how important, to cover watering holes as the First Nations people skillfully did with rocks or branches to minimise evaporation. But as I wrote the introduction, and this is the part that I don't want us to skip over and pass over, as Chris alluded to, I wrote the investigation and trying to empathise and trying to understand with my cultural biases and limited understanding, and hence my fear and gratefulness to Cambridge and to Chris. I wrote that First Nations people centuries and centuries ago had the same challenges with water that we face today. And trying to kind of put overarching ones on that, I said, the challenge is, what do you do when there's too much water? What do you do when there's not enough water? And what do you do to make sure the water's clean? Were kind of the three general ways of the issues that we have right now. So I was trying to empathise. And Chris still kindly and respectfully back to me said, interesting what you're saying, Justin, here, but you're completely wrong. Kind of, he didn't quite say it that way, but completely that, your culture, our Australian culture now, of trying to understand how we manage water and contain it, or, so kind of wear the master of water or something, Chris said, First Nations people didn't think, how do we trap it and manage it? We think about how we understand it and our relationship with it. And if there's a lot of water at this stage in this part of our country, our land, then let's go live somewhere else for a little bit and understand that and harness. And so as he wrote it, then helped me rewrite the introduction. It's these sort of ideas of relationships with nature, understanding that and recognizing that, and acknowledging and championing it, and so on. So that was one little example of how I've changed a little bit through this project. If we could go to the next slide, I really just wanted to spend, say, 5 minutes showing you one of them. And it's just literally kind of copied and paste from the resources you'll have available to you. So here we go. And if we just happily keep building the slide, please. My hopes, as I said, I wanted it to be real. And this is kind of the way I articulated my hopes, because I wanted to have a real purpose to doing this. And again, with Cambridge University, with Scott telling me his hopes for how Cambridge want to address these elaborations, and still understanding, as Chris said, they're optional, but encouraging people and giving them more than a sentence, giving the resources that suddenly we could maybe lean into it. And I think the maths within this, talking about fire and the rate of fire spread, is not maths I've written or taught before in year 7, 8, 9, 10 kind of curriculum. Yes, maybe there was a problem solving question, something about something, but not really. So it's new maths and very relevant maths. So to educate young Australians on the strong, resilient, rich and diverse cultures of Australian First Nations people through a series of maths investigations. And I do hope that these investigations will assist Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders see their history, their identities, their culture within the mathematics curriculum, which they haven't had that opportunity in the past. And I also hope, as it shifted me, that the investigations assist all students to engage in reconciliation, respect and recognition. And it won't be all those threes in any one investigation, but that's kind of the movement, the direction we're heading, because I'm sure there'll be next iterations and next stages. There'll be even more ways to understand it as we're kind of continuing to do this work. So the investigations are endeavouring to enhance us learning from the skills and knowledge and wisdom of Australian First Nations people, to understand them, the First Nations people, and the way they related with the earth, our country, and with people, and then to have a responsiveness, a sensitivity to First Nations people. Thank you. Next slide. So here's the one that I'd like to talk about. It's a year 8 investigation. It's called Cool Fires Prevent Mega Fires. And it's, in a nutshell, this idea, the skill of burning off in the appropriate conditions and the right seasons to help the ecosystem, to help the growth, as we understand, of bushfires through the regeneration, but also then to prevent the mega fires because we're containing and managing the undergrowth and so on. So I did put this background information. It's only 4 paragraphs. There's 2 here and 2 on the next slide. And if you don't mind if I read them with you. Fire has been a natural presence on the Australian continent for millions of years, playing a vital role in shaping plant and animal populations. Numerous plants and animals have adapted to thrive with fire, many plant species relying on it to support their reproduction and growth. You may, of course, choose to put a PowerPoint or show a little YouTube clip of some element of that would relate to your knowledge of that experience. For thousands of years, First Nations people have demonstrated extraordinary knowledge and skill in managing the land, particularly through the use of fire. One remarkable practice is the use of cool burns, a type of controlled fire that plays a crucial role in shaping and sustaining the environment. Unlike the destructive hot burns that can cause megafires, cool burns are carefully managed and serve as a life-giving process, promoting plant growth, reducing fuel loads, and protecting ecosystems. And the next 2 paragraphs read like so. On the next slide, please. First Nations people's fire management reflects a deep understanding of the land and its conditions. These burns are conducted under specific environmental factors, such as low wind speeds, high humidity, damp fuel, to ensure the fire stays small and controlled. This contrasts with modern megafires, which often result from a combination of unmanaged fuel loads, extreme heat and dry conditions, factors intensified by climate change. This investigation explores how cool burns reduce the risk of megafires by examining the rate of fire spread. Using a mathematical model, students will calculate how variables like wind speed, temperature, humidity influence fire behaviour. This activity will not only deepen students' understanding of rates, but also highlight the importance of applying traditional fire management practices to care for country and safeguard Australia's environment for future generations. So how you do that, I think my only words would be to echo Chris, that please don't do a superficial pass, and please enrich it in even stronger and more beautiful ways for your class. Now to the activity, just quickly. So the tasks, and in this one there are 5 tasks. Part 1 talks, well, what even is like the spread of fire? We know that, but let's even make that real and practical. And so you can see here in part A, imagine that a lit match was positioned under the center of a large piece of paper. And so the match with the flame going up then, catches fire under the piece of paper. What shape will that fire make as it spreads? And I think many young people would say, yeah, probably a circle, I think, if that's coming through, and then it would kind of grow out as a circle, and understanding the way that a fire would spread. On to the next slide. We then go, well, if possible, of course, we put it with detailed notes on safety and give an option of possibly doing that in a science classroom, possibly doing it outside in nature with a dry pile of leaves, or inside with a very large piece of paper. But this kind of also feels real, and also integrating kind of almost a science experiment with a bit of maths, and say, well, let's see how we can see this rate of spread of fire in this controlled condition. Thank you. Next slide. And then we go, well, let's in part 2 now introduce wind. So if wind's coming, well, what shape's now going to? And maybe quite a few students will go, well, maybe that'd be kind of a bit oval shaped, a bit elliptical, like an ellipse would kind of form, and so on, and maybe depending on. And so we talk about wind to have a range of questions. So I'm missing out all sorts of pages and questions here. I'm just giving you an overview. Then in part 3, we go, okay, so we've introduced wind. That's a key factor in fires. Let's introduce temperature and humidity, and let's understand that part. Thank you. Next slide. Then we move into part 4, and quite a sophisticated year 8 model that you can see here, that the rate of the fire spread is equal to the conductivity of the fuel load, the K, multiplied by U, the wind speed, divided by this 60 minus the temperature plus the relative humidity. And so that's a complex model to help us understand forward spread. Then, as a whole range of questions, then we move into part 5, talking about cool fires, preventing mega fires, some research opportunities, some opportunities for the students to express their understanding of that. And the last slide I just have just shows kind of some of the questions, like you'd be used to. Some of the investigations, the questions are quite don't require a lot of investigating and just calculating, and then some are very quite open-ended investigations, encouraging research and communication. So here you can see more the relatively standard questions of, well, what about if it was this value and this value? What would be the rate of spread of the fire? So thank you for listening to those hope it gives you a little snippet of one of the 12. That was one of the year 8 projects, helping us embrace the understanding of the First Nations people approach to fire management, and then moving it into giving the students a deeper understanding of the conditions regarding cool fires and mega fires.
Fantastic. Thank you, Justin. Chris, do you want to give any more detail about that particular investigation? Let me just say before you answer, the way that these investigations came about, Justin put a couple of initial ones together that went to Chris to look over, but almost all of them were developed by Chris. Chris chose the elaborations, which he played a big part in creating initially anyway, along with Akara. He choosing the ones that would suit this amount of investigations, given we couldn't cover all of them. We were going to aim for 12, and then gave us the outlines of what we could cover, and then the structure of the activities and how those would work, along with research that came with it, and all the background that people like Justin and others would need in order to flesh out these. So it was a fantastic collaborative process. Chris, that particular one for year 8, is there anything else you'd like to add to what Justin has said?
Not really. I mean, I think Justin did an awesome job. I think the team did an awesome job from what I put forward. And I will sort of say that my activity outline was a very rough outline, and there was a lot of filling in to do by the team. So they did an awesome job at that. I just think if you can, within your class, get permission to burn leaves outside, I think that is a good thing to do, because that's what we do one of our STEM camps. And the reason I'm saying that is that in the real world, when you're outside, nothing's perfect. Yeah. So you won't get your perfect circle. You might get a near circle. But what you can encourage students to do is to watch how the fire is behaving, to get understanding why it didn't get that perfect circle. So in perfect conditions, you will always get a circle if it's uniform enough for the stuff you're burning. But if there's a slight breeze, or if there's a slight rise in the hill, these things will warp that circle for reasons. And that the act within itself is a learning experience, to just observe the fire, to see how it's burning and why it's behaving. I think that would actually give a lot of richness to this activity if you can manage to do that. I know these things are difficult I've heard they're difficult within schools. I've never done it myself, but yeah. So if you can, it's an awesome sort of activity to do with the kids. Yeah.
Excellent. We do have a question here, and I'll put this one to you, Chris. And we did think about this, and you worked with Fiona and others to try and put together some teacher guidance that would assist with this. But here's the question: is there a wrong way that these resources could be used which would cause offence to First Nations peoples? In brackets, this replaces a long, complicated question about wanting to do the right and respectful thing, and not, as a non-Indigenous Australian, put myself in the position of speaking for Indigenous people.
I honestly believe it. If you can only do it wrong if you made an effort to do it wrong. They put it that way. If you enter these activities with the mindset that we are here to learn about and value Indigenous cultures and peoples, then I don't think you can get a whole lot wrong at all, really. Because before you deliver to students, you would be engaging with these activities and learning stuff for yourself. And I think one of the best sort of approaches is to share, to sort of even say to students, this is what I'm learning. This is fantastic. You should know about this, and be excited about that. And that when you get that sort of excitement that's attached to this to these activities, you will. I can't see how you do these things wrong. If you are lucky enough to have Indigenous education workers in your school, or even Indigenous teachers, enroll them in that sort of discussion before you go in, and just talk to them about it if you're really, really worried. But again, if you come from with the right mindset, then I don't think you can go wrong.
One other question for you, Chris.
Could I add, Scott?
Oh, absolutely, Justin, go for it.
I just, my comment, echoing Chris, is that I think Cambridge have done their due diligence. So the answer to that is no. That they, so I would have had exactly the same question, and maybe a few months ago did have that question back to you, Scott, and everything. And Scott, through Cambridge's due diligence, through Chris, has kind of ensured now we can't do harm. We can't, and so I just wanted to add that my assurance as well.
Actually, I can actually add one more thing, because even the Koalakan activity, and even when I was trying to engage with, I was engaging with other ranger groups. They were actually excited that people were actually thinking about them, for one thing, thinking about the job they do, and to actually get people to understand the job they do. Yes. So there's a lot of sharing from Aboriginal perspective in a lot of ways. I think it only gets a bit sensitive if you're reproducing cultural artifacts or something like that, which we're not doing through these activities. It's about knowledge, it's about understanding, it's about country, it's about those things. So you'll be fine.
Another question for you, Chris. Let's say we've got a school in near Perth, or a school somewhere in Central Australia or in South Australia or in Western Sydney or down here in Port Melbourne. How could teachers and schools think about where they are, what country they're on, when they're thinking about implementing these investigations? We don't want them to just do it without thinking about that. So what can they do to assist with engaging with the country that they're teaching and learning on?
Yeah, I think there's two things we need to think about here. I think from memory, all the elaborations are connected to some part of the country. I think that's true. Maybe we'll have some reference to some part of the country. I've never had a problem with other Aboriginal kids across Australia learning about other Aboriginal communities, or any student in different locations learning about other Aboriginal communities. One thing. So as long as you value where that activity is coming from and again understanding, like for example, WeMe is from the Warlpiri community. So talk a bit about the Warlpiri community. You know, when you're actually doing WeMe before you actually engage with activity, that activity. But also, what I would encourage you to do is to start thinking about, through those activities, what it would mean for the country that you're sitting on. You know, who are the rangers that are near you, for example, or if I were going to, like I think we even said for the construction or the architecture top one, how would this change if you put this in your community, or would it be viable within your area? You know, and then what would be viable within your area? So you start to sort of relate back what's happening within the environment you're in, within the conditions you're in, and seeing whether these things fit, and also with the people that are close by you. So localizing is always good for kids, yeah. But also learning about other Aboriginal people across Australia is also good. And building that connection between the two is even better if you can. Yeah. I hope I answered your question, Scott.
I think you nailed it. All right, let's. There are a couple of other questions, but they some of them tend to just be, where can we find these? When are they coming out? And all that kind of stuff. So I actually have some slides on those exact topics. So let's go to the next one, please. Okay, what we will supply for each investigation, we've covered this a bit already, but there'll be a student version that doesn't have any answers or suggested solutions. There'll be a teacher version of the investigation that does contain all of the answers, suggested responses, plus a marking rubric along the lines of the one that Chris showed. Each one is slightly different and tailored to that specific investigation. So ones that relate to probability or collecting data will be slightly different to the ones that are built upon something that's more algebraic in nature or measurement and so on. But they are all somewhat similar and achieve the same goal. And for the question that we had earlier, that they are intended to assist teachers who may have fear about doing it the wrong way, so to speak. There are extensive teacher notes as well, including links to videos of the Quandamooka Rangers that Chris mentioned in that koala count investigation. There's a lot of brilliant stuff in there as well. We'll also supply information for schools that are not teaching the AC 9.0, but a curriculum or syllabus that has come out of that. For example, the Victorian Curriculum 2.0 and the New South Wales syllabus. So we'll provide guidance on all of those. Where you'll find them, so you'll access them from within the teacher resources, and we'll put a drop down that's called the ATSIMA / Cambridge investigation. So you'll find them all there. Most will be published within the next few days. So this week, there are a handful of others for which we're waiting on some permissions to clear, but those will be published as soon as that happens. Next slide, please. I just wanted to thank Justin, who worked on all the Year 7 and 8 investigations along with Chris, to Zoe Withers, who wrote 2 of the Year 9 investigations and all of the Year 10 ones. Zoe is works down here in Melbourne, a fantastic young teacher and mathematician, has worked with me and our lead author, David Greenwood, pretty extensively over the last few years. And our long-standing Cambridge author based in New South Wales, Jennifer Goodman. So thank you for all the work that you've done. And my particular thanks to Chris, Fiona, Melinda Pearson at ATSIMA for being extremely tolerant of not getting replies to her emails quickly enough and just extremely patient. And yeah, my sincere appreciation for the work that Melinda and Chris and Fiona and others have done to help us out with these. And I think there's one more slide left. Two more slides. There's a little bit more about the Victorian Curriculum 2.0 New South Wales syllabus, and there is a WA curriculum that has just been released, and we intend to publish these investigations in some form to assist with that, but we are waiting on SCARS's guidance in terms of how they're approaching this cross-curriculum priority. That we don't have that yet. Next slide, please. So these investigations exist because of the guidance and expertise provided by ATSIMA and Professor Matthews in particular. We are very proud of these investigations, but as Chris said earlier, and we mean this sincerely, these should be considered to be an introduction rather than a comprehensive set of resources. We do encourage schools to get in touch with ATSIMA via their website to learn how connections can be made between maths and the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander histories and cultures cross-curriculum priority and all the other amazing work that Chris and the team at ATSIMA do. They do some extraordinary work dealing very directly with schools, all the fantastic resources that they have on their website, the PD that they run, all the brilliant things that they do there. And Chris, personally, I'm very excited to see more of your connections between kinship groups and abelian groups and group theory. That is quite extraordinary. So thank you very much, Chris, to you in particular.
Cool. Can I just say one thing?
Absolutely.
Before everyone leaves, if you come to the ATSIMA website, we're always looking for members to help support the organisation, or you can donate. So please help us keep doing the work that we're doing. So thank you.
Back to you, Kim.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, on behalf of Cambridge, a huge thanks to both Chris and Justin for sharing your wisdom and passion with us all here today. And also thanks to you, Scott, as always, for putting all of this together and making it happen. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to come along today. I hope you all feel rich in your understanding and knowledge and empowered to use these investigations in your classroom. Please journey safely if you're still to travel home from school this evening. And to all of you, take care.